prayers are offered to Donald Graham.
Well, Don, he'd do anything for anybody. He was a real nice guy.
Former deacon and friend.
He left a real void here.
His was a big voice.
He was always willing to help you.
In this tiny parish.
We miss his smiling face. We miss his cheerful attitude, his kindliness.
He was a victim, first of all, a victim of our time.
Let us pray.
A voice now silenced.
Maybe Donald got caught up in something that was beyond his ability to master.
Donald Graham got caught up in road rage. One cold February night, he flashed his high beams at another car. A small protest, perhaps, but that simple act began a chain reaction that left one man dead. And Donald Graham, he found himself being called something other than deacon.
The killer, Donald Graham, on February 20th, 1994, saw some activity on the road which enraged him.
Assistant District Attorney John Letourneau.
And to understand this case, you have to understand that the activity was something not even directed towards him on the road.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
To understand how a 54-year-old church deacon could undergo such a transformation, we came here to the Cedar Junction Maximum Security Prison in Massachusetts.
That night in 1994, take me from the beginning. You and your wife had been out for the evening?
Well, our dance class was Sunday afternoon, and if we have a good afternoon of dancing, we don't step on each other's feet. Generally, we'll go to supper, and we went to supper that night.
It had been a good day for the retired auto worker, but it was about to turn ugly. On his way home, Graham, traveling in the right lane of I-95, spotted a car coming up fast in the far left lane. The driver was a woman, and she was gaining rapidly on another car carrying two men.
Car comes up behind him and flicks the high beams, you know, asking him to move over.
After a moment, the woman did pass by, but the other driver flashed his high beams at her.
So you have a situation where they are now giving her steady high beams and following close behind her.
As I was moving over, I didn't notice how close they were behind her.
My point is, you pulled behind them.
I moved over 2 lanes, yes.
And gave them the high beams?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Why did I do that? I didn't like what I saw. I don't like people bullying other people. I was disgusted.
In the car, now being pursued by the former deacon, were Mike Blodgett.
From what I understand, he told his wife he was going to teach Mike a lesson.
And passenger Rob Aston.
We started off in the high-speed lane. He showed up behind us. And then we moved to the middle lane. And he moved to the middle lane behind us, still with his high beams on.
The cars continued down the highway in the same position, with Graham tailing Blodgett. After miles and miles of this behavior, Blodgett decided he'd had enough.
Mike said, I'm going to pull over and ask this guy what his problem is.
What'd you do?
I pulled into the breakdown lane and stopped immediately, as far behind him as I could.
Why not just pass on by? Why not just say, I'm out of this, and I'm out of here?
I didn't want that man behind me. You never let an enemy behind you under any circumstances.
Mike Blodgett was an emergency medical technician. He and Aston, on their way home, were still in uniform. They got out of their car and walked toward Graham, Blodgett carrying a big flashlight.
I got out of the car quickly because I wanted to see how big this guy was. If he's pulling over behind us, he must be a big guy because he must be confident.
I told my wife we got big trouble coming down here, and I looked at her and she couldn't even speak.
I saw him get out of his car and go immediately to his trunk.
I had a crossbow in the trunk.
That's right. Deacon Graham, an archery buff, kept a crossbow in his trunk for self-defense.
I warned him immediately to hold it right there. You better go back to your car. As I'm saying this, I'm loading an arrow into it. As I'm warning him, Blodgett starts screaming, "What's your problem, you asshole?" And these are the only words he ever used to me.
But Aston says no one said anything.
That moment seems frozen in time forever because it was very dark. And I can remember looking and thinking, does he have a gun?
What a scene, what a scene. I mean, dark, cold February night. Man with a crossbow, cocked and ready. Man in his face, your description.
Screaming.
And then all of a sudden I heard an air noise, and Mike said he shot me. That was an arrow. And I can remember backing up and looking and he was already covered, soaked with blood.
After memorizing Graham's license plate, Aston drove Blodgett to a nearby hospital.
They get to the hospital and they never stop the bleeding and he dies.
They split the guy all open looking, you know, they just opened him right up, looking for the bleeding inside his chest. And it was up here all along.
The blades fly open on the initial contact, and this was Donald Graham's crossbow.
Assistant DA John Letourneau tried the case in New Bedford, Massachusetts.
He told the police in his statement that he had 3 arrows in the quiver. They were all equipped with what's known as an expanding broadhead point. The arrow tip razor edges slicing through that major artery.
The arrow goes in, and then by design, it spreads out.
Mm-hmm.
That's designed to do what?
To cut.
And to make bleed.
Yes, definitely. It's designed to kill.
It's called a punch cutter tip. The arrow hits its target, razors expand and open, and what those razors do will cut through the flesh of presumably an animal being hunted to cause as much damage and as much bleeding as possible.
You know, I've got to tell you, it sounds terrible. Tell me why I shouldn't think that if I shouldn't.
You can say all you want to about it sounding terrible, and when it hits a human being, it certainly is. But you know, I only had seconds.
Mike Blodgett didn't even have that. What word or words would you use to describe Mr. Graham?
Mr. Graham was clearly enraged that evening. Mr. Blodgett, when he stopped, was angry. But Mr. Blodgett was deserving of an explanation about why this man was harassing him for these 8-some-odd miles down the highway. He was not deserving of being shot by a crossbow.
A jury agreed, and Graham was convicted of first-degree murder with extreme cruelty and atrocity. But to this day, he insists that he was only defending himself and his wife against 2 bigger and younger men.
You know what I haven't heard, it occurs to me? I haven't heard you say, I'm sorry.
You haven't heard me say, I'm sorry. Well, I'm sorry that it happened. I wish it hadn't happened.
You're sorry it happened, but you're not sorry you did it?
I'm sorry it happened. I'm sorry that I had to defend myself. I was forced to defend myself. And I will not apologize for defending my wife and defending my own life. I won't apologize for that. Am I sorry for a bullshit? It's as simple as that. Bullshit. I'm not going to apologize for doing the right thing. I did nothing wrong to him.
Graham received a life sentence with no possibility of parole. His wife, the woman he vowed to protect, is now divorcing him.
How is it 3 grown men wind up on the side of the road on a cold February night with one of them soon to die and the other soon to be sentenced to life in prison? How could this happen?
It's so difficult to tell you. Certainly there was a rage on that road that evening.
A lot of us are carrying a whole lifetime worth of bad memories.
And it all happened in, what, 5-10 minutes, 5-10 miles? In the space of a lifetime. Just a whisker.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Find yourself driving more carefully these days?
Mr. Rather, I don't even look out the side windows. If somebody beeps at me or has something to yell at me, I just look straight ahead and just keep driving.